In Sanaa's hospitals, the children's wards offer a glimpse into the suffering of millions. A country so hungry, the weakest no longer survive. Like Asad Hassan, 9 months old, but fading away. He's the most recent member of his family, but he may be the next to leave it. And many others, like 13-year-old Murad, caught in a cycle of malnutrition and sickness that grips children and makes recovery near impossible. His father has nowhere else to turn.
My son suffers from malnutrition and now he is also sick. He's been like this for 3 months and he cannot walk. I brought him to this hospital but still have to buy the medicine from outside.
The hospitals here constantly run out of medication. For each starving child, there are an untold number famishing silently in a home somewhere, hidden from view, unable to afford a journey to the hospital. Even the staff here can't make a living.
The situation is getting worse. We are receiving many cases from all over the country. The doctors and nurses here, we work without salaries and can barely pay for the bus to come to the hospital.
The war in Yemen has caused a man-made famine. 3/4 of the country's population of 29 million are in need of humanitarian assistance. And the United Nations says the most vulnerable 400,000 children have begun to die. American support for the war began under President Obama and was ramped up by President Trump. Now, the new Biden administration has ended American military support in line with what it calls a recalibration of the U.S.'s relationship with Saudi Arabia. But that won't be enough to stop this famine. The UN's World Food Programme head, David Beasley, visited Yemen last week, touring hospitals and talking to key players.
I said, "Doctor, how many beds do you have?" He says, 25. I said, 25? I said, what do you do if you don't have enough beds? And she said, I send them home. I said, well, what happens? He said, most of them die.
The technical classification for famine, as calculated by the UN, has been met for tens of thousands of Yemenis. It's called the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, or IPC for short. The group of people just underneath famine classification is so vast it encompasses millions. That has never been seen on this scale before in modern times.
Well, actually, when famine hits, it's almost too late. And supposedly we've got about 50 or 60,000 people in famine conditions, but IPC, that would be IPC level 5. IPC level 4, and that is emergency level, which means they are knocking on the door. That doesn't mean people aren't already dying. That just means it hasn't reached a classification high enough to qualify for famine. But people are dying as we speak.
The blockade on rebel-held areas has made it difficult to access fuel. The gas is nearby, on ships in the waters off the main port controlled by the rebels, but it's being blocked by the Saudi-led coalition from coming in to dock and offload.
I can understand in war you have certain types of blockade, but there's certain things that must come through that allow innocent victims of war to survive. And so here we are again now with this fuel blockade, allowing just enough fuel to run certain elements of the humanitarian support system, but it's not enough.
The UN says it needs $4 billion to keep feeding the people of Yemen. In a summit last week, international donors pledged less than half of that. David Miliband heads the International Rescue Committee.
The lesson of COVID is that money isn't short if you decide it's needed, because countries around the world have delivered trillions of dollars in support for their domestic economies, quite rightly. We're talking here about billions of dollars which are needed to prevent people from dying.
The Biden administration has appointed a new U.S. envoy for the peace process, Timothy Lenderking. And there are efforts to get all sides to negotiate. Yet, in the meantime, paradoxically, fighting has ramped up. An offensive by the Houthis to take the eastern city of Marib has intensified in recent weeks. And Houthi drones sent into Saudi Arabia resulted in Saudi airstrikes on the rebel-held capital last week.
Everyone claims that the war can't be won militarily, but it sure seems as though the Houthis think it can.
Ilana Delosier is a fellow at the Washington Institute and an expert on Yemen and its fighting factions. A road to peace, she says, will be complicated by the fractured reality of the fighting groups on the ground.
I think what most of them are doing is saying, okay, my enemy did this yesterday, I'm going to do this today in order to position themselves better in the future.
As for the Saudis, It will be very tough for them to get out of their 6-year quagmire in Yemen without further destabilizing their own long border with the country.
In some ways, the war has become a defensive war. I'm not saying it's not also still offensive, but I'm just saying that there is more of a defensive element to it since the Houthis have been able to send missiles into Riyadh.
For the 29 million Yemenis left stuck in this war, diplomatic efforts to end it hold their greatest hope. A vital part of that will be getting the economic hardships eased and also getting the world's attention long enough to care.
We need to